Hi, everyone. Welcome to a virtual planetarium show hosted by the Roberson Museum and Science Center. My name is Hannah, and I'll be giving you your virtual planetarium show today. Before we begin, I would suggest that you put your screen in full screen so that the night sky appears as big as possible on your screen. On here we have all four cardinal directions. So we have north, south, east, and west. If you were to walk outside and look at the sky, you would be facing one of these directions. But this is set up more like a sky chart. Here we have the northern sky at the top, the southern sky at the bottom, and the eastern and western skies on the sides. So the way that you can think of this is imagine you walked at the top of a hill and laid down on your back. So you're looking up at the sky, and the center of the sky is the center of the circle. Here we're looking at the night sky as it could appear on March 6th from Binghamton, New York. We're assuming that it will be a clear, cloudless night on March 6th, which, being Binghamton, fingers crossed, it's usually pretty cloudy here. Other than clouds, there is one other factor that could change how the night sky looks, and that's light pollution. Here in Binghamton, we have a lot of city lights from businesses and houses. That means that when you go outside to stargaze, you might only be able to see the very brightest stars. But if you go out away from the city lights into a very dark area, you'll be able to see more and more stars. And if you're very lucky and you go into a very clear, dark area, you'll be able to see a patch of what looks to be like a clear, glowing cloud across the sky. This is actually the Milky Way. And you might be thinking to yourself, aren't we in the Milky Way galaxy? And you would be correct. We live in the outer arms of the Milky Way galaxy. But if we look inward toward the center of our spiral galaxy, we'll see that our galaxy is made up of 100,000 million stars. But they're so far away that all the light kind of merges together. And it's so far away that by the time the light from those stars reaches us, it's very dim. So that means that the Milky Way to us just appears as a glowing cloud banding across our skies that can only be seen on very clear nights in areas of low light pollution. But our Milky Way isn't the only galaxy that can be found. Our nearest neighboring galaxy is the Andromeda Galaxy. The Andromeda Galaxy can be found within the constellation of Andromeda, and it's a spiral galaxy just like our own Milky Way. But it has way more stars, about 1 trillion stars, and it's twice the size of our galaxy. It's thought that in about 5 billion years, the Andromeda Galaxy could merge with our own galaxy. So that can be found on the evening of March 6th in the northwestern sky, right along the horizon. Andromeda won't always be visible in our night sky, though. Occasionally, it will dip below the horizon. There are some constellations that never fall below the horizon, though, and those are called circumpolar constellations. They're called circumpolar constellations because they circle around the North Pole, and they always are visible in our northern sky. From our northern hemisphere, where Binghamton is, we should always be able to find these circumpolar constellations as long as the sky is clear. So if I bring up the constellations. The first circumpolar constellation that we should be able to find is Ursa Major. Probably are very familiar with Ursa Major because it has the Big Dipper inside of it. Now, many people think that the Big Dipper is a constellation, but that's a misconception. The Big Dipper is what's known as an asterism. An asterism is a feature that's within a constellation, but not a constellation itself. So over here, we found the constellation of Ursa Major, and we see just inside of it are the Big Dipper's stars with the ladle and the handle. So that's in the northeastern sky. So now that we found Ursa Major, we can actually use this constellation to help us find others. If we follow these middle stars here, the ones that make up the end of the ladle of the Big Dipper, and they'll point us over to Ursa Minor and its star of Polaris. Now, Polaris is a very special star. It's also known as the North Star because it's right above our North Pole. So that means that while the Earth is spinning on its axes, all the stars look like they're spinning around. But Polaris, being above our pole, looks like it's staying still. As we see, if I speed up time, it looks like the stars are all spinning, but Polaris looks like it's staying still with all the other stars spinning around it. We also notice that Ursa Minor has the Little Dipper inside of it. That's because the Little Dipper, like the Big Dipper, is an asterism within Ursa Minor. So now that we've found both the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, we can find all the rest of the circumpolar constellations. The next one we can find is Draco. So you can find Draco by looking for the constellation that wraps around Ursa Minor. As you might have already found, this one right here is Draco. It wraps right around Ursa Minor, and right next to it is Cepheus. Cepheus looks like a square with a triangle on it, so it kind of looks like a child's drawing of a house. And right next to Cepheus, we see Cassiopeia, which is also very easy to find in the night sky because it has very bright stars in it. So now if I turn on the artwork, we'll be able to see that here we have Cassiopeia, the queen, Cepheus, the king, Ursa Minor, the little bear, Ursa Major, the big bear, and Draco, the dragon. So these are all the circumpolar constellations, so they never fall below the horizon, and we'll be able to find them on a clear night, no matter what season it is. So now we've learned a lot about the northern sky, so we'll turn around and look at the bottom of our screen where we have the southern sky. And one of the most famous constellations is the winter constellation of Orion, which is very easy to find this time of year. It's in the southern sky, slightly to the west. So if we look over at Orion, we'll see that Orion has very bright stars making up the belt and also bright stars in the shoulders and the legs. Orion the Hunter also has a sword made up of the Orion Nebula. And in the Orion Nebula, new stars are being born. So here we have Orion again, and he's facing another constellation known as Taurus. So here in Taurus, we have the planet of Mars. Mars has been in the news a lot recently because we just had another rover land on it. It's the rover Perseverance, and it landed in the Jezero crater on February 18th. So it's been really exciting to see all the new images and information that rover has been sending back. And over here we see Mars's two moons. We see Phobos and Deimos, both of the moons of Mars. Mars is the most visible planet at this week. All of the other planets will be more visible later on in the month, and mostly in the very early morning. And if we go back to the southern sky, there's a feature of the winter triangle. So if we look down here, we'll actually see that we have a bunch of very bright stars down here. We have Rigel from Orion, we have Cirrus from Canis Major, and we have Procyon from Canis Minor. So we have Orion the Hunter and his two hunting dogs, Canis Major and Canis Minor. So we have the big dog and the little dog, and the brightest stars of each of these three constellations, if you connect them all together, they make an asterism known as the winter triangle. So it's not just visible in wintertime. Here in early spring, we can find it very easily by looking for Orion. At the back end of Taurus, we have what's known as the Pleiades. The Pleiades are also called the Seven Sisters because on a very clear night, you should be able to see about 7 stars all huddled together. If you look very closely, you'll see it's actually a bunch of stars. The Pleiades are a star cluster. A star cluster is a group of stars that have formed very close together in space at about the same time. In Japan, the Pleiades are known as Subaru. That's why if you're a car owner, you might recognize this as being the logo for the car Subaru. So along with Taurus, you might be recognizing Gemini, Cancer, Leo, etc. And that's because these are the Zodiac constellations, made famous in pop culture by the Zodiac constellations of astrology. All of these constellations lie along an imaginary line called the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the line that the sun appears to follow along throughout the course of a year. So if we could see the constellations during the daytime, it would look like the sun passed through a different constellation for each month of the year. And to show you, we'll take a look during daytime so that I can show you where the sun is. So I've turned off sunlight so we can see just the constellations and the sun. So here we have the sun in the southern sky. It's the big ball of light that you see. Normally when the sun is up, the sky is blue, but I've turned off all the sunlight so the sky is black. And here we see that the sun is next to a section labeled March. That's because every March, the sun appears to pass through this portion of the ecliptic. And that section that the sun is currently in is in the section next to Aquarius. And the way that zodiacs work is whatever section of a constellation that the sun appears in when you're born is what your zodiac symbol is. So right now, if a baby was born today, their symbol would be Aquarius because that's where the sun is right now. The ecliptic isn't just about the zodiacs. The ecliptic marks the flat plane of our solar system that all of our planets and moons revolve around. So that means that all of the planets can also be found right along the ecliptic. One other thing that the ecliptic is helpful for is telling us when we're going to have an equinox. The March equinox happens on March 21st. An equinox is when there's an equal number of hours of daylight and darkness, or 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness, or equal night, equinox. So every March 21st, we have our spring equinox. And at that time, the sun will appear in the southern sky 45 degrees above the horizon, and it will cross over the area of the equatorial line that intercepts with the line that the sun passes through for the zodiacs. So that means that the ecliptic and the equator will cross each other. So what's the equator line? The equator line is the line of the Earth that separates the top half from the bottom half. And if that was projected into space, it would be the line in green that you see right here. So here we see the sun is right where the two lines are crossing on the day of the equinox. So here we see that if you were to stand at the equator and look directly up at noon, the sun would be right above your head at noon on the day of an equinox. Another fun event coming up later this month is the supermoon. So the supermoon will be happening on March 28th. It will actually be the first of 4 supermoons in a row. So if you want to see the first of 4 supermoons, you'll want to go outside on March 28th. So you'll want to look in the southeastern sky, but the earlier that you go out, the more eastern you'll want to look. And the moon will be very easy to spot because it will be so much brighter than usual. And that's why they call it a supermoon. Not because it's bigger, because the moon doesn't really change very much in how big it appears, but it will appear so much brighter and shinier that it might seem a little bit bigger. And that's because the moon will be on the opposite side of the Earth as the sun, and that will let it reflect so much more sunlight than it usually gets to. And so here we see the moon is a full moon, and it's over here on the night of the 28th, and we can fly over to see it. So that's what the full moon will look like on the 28th. And this full moon has a couple of fun names. Like, it's also known as the full worm moon, the crow moon, the sap moon, and the lantern moon. But this isn't the only fun event happening this month. The most fun event of them all is happening on March 6th. That's right. On March 6th, you'll be able to see these planetarium shows in person again, finally, because we're having our grand reopening of the planetarium starting on March 6th. So thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great time stargazing.